August 1969. A summer of love quickly turns into a summer of blood. What began as a counterculture commune in the California desert ended with a series of brutal, senseless murders that shocked the nation. This is the story of the Manson Family Murders. Chapter 1. Who was Charles Manson? Born in 1934, Charles Manson had a troubled upbringing, spending much of his youth in reform schools and prison. By the 1960s, Manson had established himself as a cult leader. He had a charisma that attracted young, disillusioned followers, mostly women, who were drawn to his apocalyptic vision and messianic self-image. The Manson family, as they became known, was a group of mostly young women and a few men who lived communally under Manson's control. He promised them spiritual enlightenment and freedom from the conventional world, but what they didn't realize was that they were being manipulated into his delusional, violent fantasies. Chapter 2. Manson's obsession with Helter Skelter. Manson was obsessed with the idea of an impending apocalyptic race war, which he called Helter Skelter, a term he borrowed from the Beatles song. Manson believed that the lyrics contained secret messages directing him to start this race war. In his deluded mind, he and his followers would hide in the desert until the war ended, at which point they would emerge to take control of the world. But in the summer of 1969, Manson's paranoia grew, and he decided to take matters into his own hands. He ordered his followers to commit a series of brutal murders to ignite the chaos he craved. Chapter 3. The Tate Murders. On the night of August 8, 1969, Manson sent four of his followers, Charles Tex Watson, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Linda Kasabian, to the home of Roman Polanski, a famous film director, and his wife, actress Sharon Tate. Polanski wasn't home that night, but Tate, who was 8 months pregnant, was there with her friends. Manson had instructed his followers to kill everyone in the house, and they followed his orders in the most horrifying way imaginable. Sharon Tate and four others, Jay Sebring, Abigail Folger, Wojciech Frykowski, and Stephen Parent, were brutally murdered in cold blood. Tate, pleading for the life of her unborn child, was stabbed multiple times by Susan Atkins. The word pig was written in blood on the front door, a chilling hallmark of the crime. This murder sent shockwaves through Hollywood, as the high-profile victims and the sheer brutality left the world reeling. Chapter 4. The LaBianca Murders. Just one night after the Tate murders, Manson wasn't finished. He drove his followers to the home of supermarket executive Leno LaBianca and his wife, Rosemary. This time, Manson himself entered the home, but left before the murders began. His followers carried out the killings, stabbing the couple dozens of times, and leaving more bloody messages, including death to pigs and rise. These 2 consecutive nights of murder left Los Angeles in a state of terror, with no clear motive or suspects initially identified by the police. Chapter 5. The Investigation and Arrest. For weeks, the murders remained unsolved. The police were baffled by the randomness and sheer brutality of the crimes. But soon, an unexpected break in the case came from inside the Manson family itself. Susan Atkins, who had been arrested for unrelated charges, began bragging to her cellmate about her involvement in the Tate murders. This information quickly made its way to the authorities, leading to the arrest of Manson and several of his followers. On December 1st, 1969, Manson and his family were arrested, and the case that had terrified the nation began to unravel. Chapter 6. The Trial of the Century. In 1970, Charles Manson and his followers stood trial for the murders. Manson's presence in the courtroom was nothing short of theatrical. He carved an X into his forehead, which later became a swastika, and he often disrupted proceedings with bizarre outbursts. The prosecution, led by Vincent Bugliosi, argued that Manson had brainwashed his followers into committing the murders by preaching about the coming race war. Bugliosi made a compelling case, and despite Manson never physically participating in the killings, he was convicted under the legal doctrine of command responsibility. In 1971, Charles Manson, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Tex Watson were all found guilty of murder and sentenced to death. Their sentences were later commuted to life in prison after California temporarily abolished the death penalty in 1972. Chapter 7: Aftermath and Legacy. Manson and his followers remained in prison for the rest of their lives. Over the years, Manson continued to maintain his influence over certain fringe groups and attracted a small cult following, even behind bars. Susan Atkins passed away in 2009, Manson died in 2017, and Patricia Krenwinkel and Leslie Van Houten remain in prison today. The Manson family murders have left an indelible mark on American culture. The brutal killings symbolize the dark side of the 1960s counterculture and the disillusionment with the peace and love ideals of the era. From films to documentaries, the horrific events continue to fascinate and horrify the public. But for the families of the victims, these murders were more than a shocking crime. They were a personal tragedy that forever altered their lives. Though Charles Manson may be the infamous name that headlines this story, it's important to remember the victims. Their lives cut tragically short by a man who preached nothing but violence and hate. The Manson family murders remain one of the darkest chapters in American history, reminding us how easily a cult of personality can lead to unimaginable tragedy.